Hello everybody, my name is Rainer and this is Rainier Books. Welcome to a weekly wrap-up, to a weekly mishmash of different things that I want to talk about. Things about reading, things about books, and things about other stuff in this beautiful world we live in. Let's do this. In January was a slow reading month. I haven't read 15 books, I haven't read 25 or 35, not 45 books. I have a single digit of books that I finished, only 3 books in January, and 2 I want to talk about today because I finished them last week when the pace has gotten up a little bit. And the first one is by the Japanese, world-famous Japanese novelist Haruki Murakami, and this is a book about his writing, actually. It's about it contains a lot of sort of lectures or essays that he wrote in 2014 and 2015 in Japan that were published in these years in Japan. And now there's an English translation in 2022, I think it was published, and it's called Novelist as a Vocation by Haruki Murakami. This contains 11 essays by Murakami. The headlines or the titles are Are Novelists Broad-Minded? When I Became a Novelist, On Literary Prices, On Originality, So What Should I Write About? Making Time Your Ally, On Writing a Novel, A Completely Personal and Physical Occupation, and so on. These are the titles, and Murakami speaks in a very conventional, very colloquial, I would say colloquial, intellectual style, very easy to read, very accessible about his own career, how he did things that he did, how he came to write his first novel when he was 29 years old. He was visiting a baseball game in Japan, Japanese baseball. I think that's different from American baseball. And suddenly when he was sitting in that full-packed stadium, he got this sort of idea to write a novel, and he did so. And he also thinks that everyone is capable of writing at least one novel. Everybody has a novel in himself and herself, in themselves. And the question is if you become a writer after this, because then you're supposed to write your second, third, fourth, or fifth novel if you want to make novelist being a vocation for you, like Haruki Murakami did. And he talks about things like originality, which I think was very, very interesting. Speaking a lot about music, because music influenced him a lot. He was, the first novel that I actually read by him was Norwegian Wood, which is of course inspired by the Beatles title, I once had a girl, or should I say she once had me. She sat in her room, wasn't it good, Norwegian Wood. Yeah, it's based on the song Norwegian Wood by the Beatles. There's a Japanese man, I think he's flying to Europe, and in the boxes of the airplane, when he's leaving the airplane, there's music, and he listens to the song Norwegian Wood by the Beatles, which reminds him of his first big love, and sort of we're transported back in that time, to that time when it happened. Music has always been very important for Murakami. He has actually had a cafe when he started out in his professional life, a cafe together with his wife, and they had a lot of jazz concerts there with more or less well-known jazz musicians in Japan at the time. And also he speaks about originality. He speaks about the first time that he listened to the Beatles song Please Please Me, and the first time that he listened to the Beach Boys' song Surfin' USA. And both of these sort of experiences when he listened to that song for the very first time were absolutely magnificent and magnetic and miraculous for him, because he had such a great feeling when he listened to the originality, because he had never heard something like that before. And that's also the thing that is a part of a great novel, that it has a great originality, like those songs by the Beach Boys or the Beatles when Murakami listened to them for the first time. So this is a very interesting book and a very beautiful style. What should I write about? About characters. What kind of characters should I include? And who do I write for? He says that he writes for himself in the end. He's not writing for anyone, actually. And he's very thankful and grateful about all the readers that he has all over the world. But in the end, Murakami says, I am writing for myself, for my own pleasure. It seems to be a very disciplined pleasure that he has there, sitting, writing the first version of a novel, and the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and maybe the sixth, however many times he needs to rework until the novel can be sort of given to someone else, to his wife, who's his first reader. And it's a very interesting book. I liked it, and I really would recommend it to you if you like Haruki Murakami. I know that I definitely have to read and want to read more of this great author. The second book that I finished in this week actually was this morning actually. I finished the audio version of the National Book Award winning book for 2022 in the nonfiction category. This is by Imani, Professor Imani Perry, and it's called South to America, A Journey Along the Mason-Dixon Line in the Search for America, I think. That's a beautiful title. I like it very much. And for me, this book was a little bit mysterious because I anticipated, of course, that it would have a lot to do with slavery, with race issues, because the author is black and the Mason-Dixon line, the south of the United States. And but the problem for me was that, and is with the book, that I haven't visited any of the places that Imani Perry takes us to. It's a journey. It's a journey by this very intelligent woman who's very educated. She knows so many things, and she takes us to so many biographies, to so many places and schools where things happened in the history of the American South, that it's really a lot of facts, a lot of characters, and I get lost a little bit because I've never been to Louisiana or Tennessee or Washington, D.C., which is actually for her already the American South. And if you look at the Mason-Dixon line, I have to admit that I hadn't heard about the Mason-Dixon line before. The Mason-Dixon line, for those of you who also do not know what it is a line, a demarcation line separating 4 U.S. states, forming part of the borders of Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, and West Virginia. It was surveyed between 1763 and 1767 by Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon as part of the resolution of a border dispute involving Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Delaware in colonial America. And the Mason-Dixon line, which is almost like a very clear line drawn there, is a line where above the line you had states without slavery, and down below that line in the South you had states and areas with slavery. And Washington, D.C. is actually south of that demarcation line, if you want. Yeah. It's a great book. I really loved it. She speaks about so many things. She travels, actually. She's really traveling through the American South and showing us places, taking us to places, taking us back into history, to the first black college in Tennessee, to schools, to always, of course, to the greatest moral question in the history of this country, as she calls it, the question of slavery and the issue of slavery. And this is a book that brought me closer to America, and also to because my teacher, Alan J. Hansen, he said, if you want to understand the United States, you have to understand Ralph Waldo Emerson's work. But now I understand, we also should learn a lot about the American South in order to understand America, not only because of slavery and the Civil War, but also because the American South has always delivered cultural things and in history, like rock and roll, and the blues is actually born in the American South by black people, by folks like Little Richard and Chuck Berry, which were then famously made by Elvis Presley, a white truck driver. But the roots are sort of black, and also in the blues music, of course, which is a great achievement of American popular culture, and it comes from black folks. I took some quotes here. I wrote down some quotes from the book that really sort of I thought were very interesting and very touching. She writes, "In a profound, unequal place, whiteness is supposed to mean something. Whenever that is threatened, a hot resentment bubbles. I cannot help but read the fire setting that way. It was a way of suffocating the imagination with the bindings of Southern tradition, which brings us to my regional designation, an errant in the wilderness." Or, Imani Perry says, a couple of pages later, "I am American. That means something to me. Some common ground with others of this soil, even if the country feels irredeemably racist and maybe not worth saving. It is what Du Bois called a two-ness, two whirring souls, black yet American. You face it in its most raw truth below the Mason-Dixon line. To be an American is to be infused with the plantation South, with its black vernacular, its insurgency, and also its brutal masculinity, its worship of whiteness, its expulsion and its massacres, its self-defeating stinginess and unapologetic pride." Great sort of summary of a lot of things that we find in this book where she is talking about. She also talks about American exceptionalism and says that American exceptionalism, that sense that we are somehow special and ordained as such, is a myth sedimented on Southern prosperity, oil, coal, and cotton. Every piece of evidence of our national distinction has relied upon this wealth of a nation, as you certainly have already gleaned. I do not think genocide, slavery, and exploitation were worth it, nor do I believe they should be tightly set aside in moments of patriotic fervor or national piety like the 4th of July or the following days. Remember your history. And there's so much history, there's so much thoughts in this book. I liked it, but I also had my problems with it because I have never been to these places, and I really would love to have the book in my hands and to travel along below the Mason-Dixon or along the Mason-Dixon line to see some of the points, to see some of the towns, of the cities, of the people, of the folks that Imani Perry is describing. I think for Americans, or for people who know the American South better than I do, it's a great, great book. I thought it was good, I liked it, and it makes me curious to absolutely see the American South somehow in the future. That about this book. What am I reading currently? I still want to read Cocoon by Zhang Yuran. I still have this book here from the library in Stockholm. Another one that I have from the library, it's a Chinese story spanning over several generations. The city library here from Stockholm also sent me a book called Mitt ibland oss, In the Middle of Us, by Evin Cetin, who is a lawyer here in Sweden, and she is representing the victims, the survivors of victims whose loved ones have been killed in gang killings, and she writes about her work. I still struggle. I also have to say that I wanted to DNF it already, and I'm not sure if I really make it through the whole book. Leigh Newman's short story collection, Nobody Gets Out Alive, it really confuses me. I have to admit it. It's not the fault of the book, maybe, but the characters are like in Morgan Talty's book, Night of the Living Rest. The characters are sort of recurring in these short stories with Janice and some other characters are returning, and it really sort of, I get always distracted within the story, so they really don't immerse me that much as I wanted them to immerse me, because I think the sujet, Alaska, is super interesting and super exciting, and I also get something out of this book, the masculinity of Alaska, the problems that especially women might have in Alaska, surviving Alaska, so to speak. But it is, on the other hand, a very rocky reading road for me with this book, and that is why I have decided sort of to give it one more try, one more story here, but then I might DNF it, and I might go over to some reading pleasures that I have lying here on my table. I know that I'm going to like these books. These are suspected 4 or 5-star reads. Jonathan Coe's Bournville, Tokyo Vice by Jake Adelstein here, Michael Connelly's new novel Desert Star, and Good Nacht, Mohammed Mbugasar's novel, Die geheimste Erinnerung der Menschen in German. It's a French novel translated into German. I don't know if it's already out in English. It certainly will come out sooner or later. So these are the books that I'm reading. Tell me what you have read, what you are reading, and if you have read anything of the books that I'm talking about, please let me know your opinion about them. And I hope to see you very soon on the channel. As always, I say thank you very much. Please subscribe and see you soon. Bye-bye.